So first of all, who are GS1? GS1 are a not-for-profit. We have to stress we're a not-for-profit. We're not a commercial organisation. We consist of 112 member organisations which cover 150 countries worldwide. We're a standards maintenance or management body, and we cover 20 industry sectors. As you'll see, we've over 2,000 staff globally and over 1.3 million member companies. Over 40 years experience from the humble barcode right up to the latest technologies in EPCIS and RFID. So our technical experience goes back over 40 years. Also, all of our standards are built upon ISO, CEN, ETSI, UNECE standards. We're not competing standards. We're all built upon the same structures. And here in Ireland, we've over 3,000 members. And what do we do? In a nutshell, and I'm going very quickly because I have about 15 to 20 minutes, we identify physical products, logistics units, pallets, cages, dolabs, trucks. We identify locations, we identify people, and we identify customers, suppliers, companies. So we're an identification organisation. We also enable the capturing of data. So when you identify a product, you can put a barcode, an RFID tag, or any other identifier on it. And we can actually help you capture that. And ultimately then, that identification links you to data that's held in a database generally. And that enables a link for you to access that data. So that's basically what we do in a nutshell. We identify, we capture, and we share. And where do we apply in the supply chain? Pretty much everywhere. Right across the supply chain from the very start to the very end. You'll find a humble barcode on almost every retail product you pick up. They're scanned over 6 billion times a day. Every supermarket of any size scans barcodes nowadays. We're found everywhere in the transport and logistics, manufacturing, farming, aquaculture. You'll find GS1 standards in use. So, traceability. How to have your cake and eat it. My task today is to try and convince you that implementing a traceability system or traceability protocols is not an expense. Most people consider it to be an additional expense or an additional burden on their business. I hope to convince you today that it's not. The benefits of traceability should outweigh the investment required to achieve it. If you're basing your current traceability on paper, you have a lot to learn and you have a lot to gain. Trust me. I hope to convince you of that through this presentation. So, just as a background, where do we stand in terms of food safety? Food safety is generally related to quality systems, safety management systems, and traceability. We effectively rank #1 in the world. That's our boast. My concern is we might not retain that because most of our companies are now looking at old technology and are complacent. Other areas of the world are moving on using the new technologies, and they're going to overtake us. It's not that we're getting worse, it's just that they're getting better. Definition of traceability should be fairly straightforward. That's an old definition now. Doesn't cover it. There's much more to traceability now and what traceability systems can achieve for your business. There's a lot more to it. Why? I won't labour the point, I'm under pressure. But why? Because there's a lot of counterfeit goods out there. You all know the general stories. If they'll counterfeit life-saving drugs, they'll counterfeit anything. You're all familiar with the horse meat scandal. Again, huge cost to industry. Over 10 million worth of product withdrawn, recalled from the market. Also, everybody thinks it's only high-value product. It's not. Very low-value product can also be counterfeited. If it can be done in volume and you can make a profit, it'll be done. So, just on traceability, I want to define a couple of things about traceability. Some of you will definitely be familiar with, some of you may not. So, standard traceability terms, there's two types of traceability generally. Internal traceability applies to what you do within your four walls. So within your production process, that's internal traceability. That's probably the easiest to achieve because you have complete control. You can determine what everybody does and how they do it and how much it costs and how much you invest in it. External traceability is where you have to relate to other people, and that is your suppliers and your customers and their suppliers and their customers. So that makes it much more complicated because you can't dictate to them what to do, how much to spend, or how to do it. So you must fall in line, and that's where standards come in. If people use the standards to their fullest, it makes life so much easier. Instead of dealing in 5 or 6 different traceability systems, because each of your suppliers require a different traceability approach, using a standard means you're effectively running one much more efficient system, and you can inevitably do it much better. Again, I stress the internal traceability, and where that links to external traceability is generally known as one step back, one step forward. And that's the legal minimum requirement. So you must record traceability information from your suppliers, your immediate suppliers, and you must record traceability information for the products you supply to your customers. That's your legal obligation since 2002. The problem is, if you still view that as your legal minimum or your actual minimum, you're probably going to run into trouble. That's also known as one up, one down. So you link with your supplier and you link with your customer. There are a number of other approaches to traceability and the sharing of traceability data. Cumulative tracking, where each stakeholder in the supply chain passes on the data that they received and they augment it with the data and the production details that they have created in their own processes. That's cumulative tracking. Single source database, quite often a proprietary solution. So somebody sets up a central repository for traceability data and a number of stakeholders submit the data to it. Invariably it ends up somebody owns the data and somebody disputes that ownership or disputes access to the data. So it has proved to be useful in very small or short supply chains, not as useful in very large or extended supply chains. We're now looking at a distributed information service or a traceability network. Now I've called it a traceability network. It's also called a supply chain network. It's not just traceability data that's stored in it. Okay? And this is the way your traceability is going. So if you're still looking at one up, one down, particularly if it's paper-based, you need to seriously consider what's happening in the future. In the next few years, the one up, one down is gone. Trust me, even legislation is heading that way. So one up, one down will no longer suffice. It's going to be distributed information sources, distributed information sources or a traceability network. Supply chain network is the broader term for general supply chain data. So to reiterate the message, one step forward, one step back is dead. It's gone, get over it. If you're looking at traceability systems and that's what you're thinking, and you're thinking you're fulfilling your obligations, think again. That's the message I want you to take home today. Obviously, you now have to consider what do you do in terms of your traceability. How do you build your systems and what's it going to cost? As I said earlier, I'm trying to convince you today that investing in traceability is a good business decision, not a cost. It's an investment. I'll give you some case studies later on to show a return on that investment, if it's done properly, of course. So, very basically, any traceability system is about data sharing, whether that's from one process to another process within your own factory, or whether that's from your supplier to your factory, or from your factory to your customer. It's about data sharing. It's about making the data available to those other processes or other stakeholders in the supply chain. The data must be accurate, consistent, and reliably available. If it's not reliably available, the system will fall over and people simply won't use it. So it must be available reliably and cheaply. There are a number of data sharing technologies. Today is not the day to get into the detail of it, but we need to make you aware of them. Many of you won't be aware of the data sharing technologies that are in use today. Okay, GDS, the Global Data Synchronization for sharing product master data. There are now companies on the continent who will not take your product master data unless it's via GDS. There are Irish companies using GDS at the moment to trade with those customers on the continent. Even as an SME, you need to be aware of GDS and what it can do for your business and how it helps you deal with the big guys. How do you get your product listed? This is the technology that's coming. Barcodes. It is a technology. People often look at me. It's a technology. It's a 40-year-old, stable, mature technology, and you can share data. The barcode is alive and well and is going nowhere, and it's a very valuable piece of technology in a traceability or supply chain. Another area people underestimate is EDI. Okay, EDI can have a reputation as being purely for electronic invoicing. It most certainly is not. EDI covers a whole range of different messages to enable companies to interact and to interoperate. So messages regarding warehouse availability, storage conditions, traceability information, even down to scheduling of trucks and transport. That can all be done via EDI, electronically, machine to machine. And regardless of what systems you have in the various different stakeholders, it's technology agnostic. We don't care whether you use SAP or some other ERP system, they can all talk to each other using EDI. It's a standard. Again, a new standard most of you probably will not be aware of. Anybody in the pharmaceutical industry probably will be, but in the food or manufacturing probably really haven't come across it yet. EPCIS. That's a new technology now which is essentially driven from the ability to share data. So to make your traceability or supply chain data available publicly, essentially, you do control who has access to it. But essentially at the flick of a switch or the tick of a box on your software, you can give access to other people, other parties to that data. We can't go into those in too much detail because I have to try and justify the cost of traceability systems. But I just want to stress, when we're talking about traceability systems, I'm not necessarily talking about one up, one down. We've moved on from that. So we have to look at the impact of putting in a traceability system, very briefly. Obviously, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis. You'd be foolish not to. Most people can identify the costs. They're pretty straightforward. There are tools available and there are methodologies available. If anybody wants to have a chat about those, they are widely available. So depending on your industry sector, there are different methodologies for estimating or calculating the cost of implementing various systems, and also for calculating a return on investment. What gains can you make? It's obviously specific to individual businesses. It's not one shoe fits all. So in terms of the costs, obviously, if you're going to put in a new system from scratch, you've got capital costs. Whether it's new software, new hardware, or new staff, you're going to have capital costs starting off. Once off implementation, you might need installation costs, training costs, one-off training costs, or even resources. You might have to take people on to help you implement a system depending on the size of your business. You have to factor those in. And also, as with any technology, there are ongoing costs for support and maintenance. Surprisingly, they can be lower than supporting or maintaining a paper-based system. People find that hard to believe, but it has been shown that the number of staff needed to maintain a computer-based system versus those needed to maintain a large paper-based system is quite a difference. So that in itself can be a benefit. If we look at the benefits, I've just taken a list of benefits from 3 different academic papers. There is some overlap, but it's to give you an idea, depending on your industry sector or your business, what benefits might accrue. So you have to consider whether it's faster and cheaper to meet regulatory compliance. That might be hard to do on paper, particularly in high-risk industries. It might open up new and expand existing markets and new customers because they now trust your traceability. You've improved your reputation. You've met their minimum requirements for getting their product listed. It might reduce your business liability costs. Fancy words for your insurance premium. If you can demonstrate that you can do limited recall and you have good food safety management systems in place, your insurance company will listen to you. That can be a direct reduction in costs there. Higher recall efficiencies and lower costs. So in the event you have to do a recall, you'll find you're able to do it quicker, you're able to do it cheaper, and you're able to limit the impact of it. Okay. Also, during the normal production processes, you can identify and reduce product wastage, particularly with product wastage due to expiry, spoilage, so where a product goes out of date. A good traceability system would always manage to maintain expiry dates and look at batches of product and manage them on an individual basis. You should also be able to simplify your data exchange, whether that's internally between processes or departments, or externally with your other stakeholders. Again, flying through this from another academic paper is just the various different benefits of implementing a traceability system. I'm just trying to show you it's not all cost. There are real, tangible benefits. Some you can measure directly, some you have to estimate and measure indirectly. Some do have a pounds, shillings, and pence value to them. Improved on-shelf availability, for example. That's a huge goal within ECR or within supply chain management. And yet traceability systems enable you to do that. You can get your product to your customer on time. Improved product quality, because you're able to go back and find root causes of non-conformances. You're able to analyze what products or what ingredients or what processes caused the problem. So as you can see, there are benefits that are not necessarily tangible, but are real benefits to your business. So we look at the common non-cost barriers. We all accept that cost is a barrier. But the non-cost barriers are where you're trying to track numerous raw materials, ingredients, and packaging products. It can be a nightmare. An awful lot of companies at the moment, particularly in foodstuffs, actually ignore their packaging and sometimes fudge their ingredient traceability. It's not a good move. They should track all three and track them in detail. Also, it leads to stricter record keeping. So for example, if you're going to manage your product correctly and keep proper traceability, you have to be able to do things you didn't do before. Splitting of product. So products come in containers that are not going to be used on the factory floor. You need to split those containers and record the splitting of them. Aggregation and disaggregation, where you're making or breaking logistics units, pallets, cages, dolabs, bins. You need to track that now because you want to know what happened to your product and you want to be able to do a mass balance. That does have new requirements, and it is a barrier because you have to think about your processes and think logically about them. You also have to look after transformations and consumption of your raw materials, your ingredients, and your packaging. But that leads to benefits. You know where you are. A proper traceability system won't let you run out of packaging, a very common problem in manufacturing process, or an ingredient that you just presumed you had because you don't need it very often. Suddenly you find you don't have it or it's out of date. It's a problem and it's costly. Again, you do have to consider making changes to your production processes. Sometimes you have to consider what's a better way to do it in order to maintain traceability or to maintain the records that are required for different processes. That might mean handling work in progress in a different way. It might mean changing the production processes or splitting an existing process into two separate processes. There are things to consider when you're doing that. Most companies also look on it as reducing flexibility. Well, I suppose it does really. If you can scribble a figure on a piece of paper and then go back and change it subsequently if it doesn't suit, that's flexibility. But it's also fooling yourself if you think you have traceability. And it's also leaving you very open if you're caught. So just to bear that in mind. And quite often it's not the company who decided to do that. It's an individual employee covering up a mistake they made without realizing the implications for the business. Also should help reduce reworking. Non-compliances lead to rework. If you don't have to destroy the product, you will have to rework it, repack it, or change it in some way. Okay, another barrier, non-cost, although I suppose indirectly it's a cost, is not having the resources or the skill sets in-house. You have to hire them in. Very briefly, we're nearly there. I don't know how we're doing. Oh, I'm way over, sorry. Very briefly, the most common mistakes. I'll concentrate on the first one. I'm trying to convince you to look at traceability as an investment, and the first thing I say is don't invest in a traceability system. You can't buy a traceability system as if it's a photocopier. It's not something you put a price on and say, right, I've bought that, that's that problem solved. It's part of your production process. It should be part of your fundamental business plan and your business strategy. And it has to be embedded in the business, not just as an add-on that somebody bought because it was cheap and the salesman looked nice. So you have to be very careful about investing in a traceability system. Also have realistic expectations. You can read those for yourself. They're fairly common mistakes to make when you're trying to implement or design a traceability system. Also, you have to consider, last one, to move your your workload. Generally, when you're running a good traceability system, your workload moves to intake to ensure that the product coming in is quality controlled, has proper identifiers on them. That might mean putting your own barcodes on product that doesn't. Or if you want to segregate product, you have to do it at intake. It's too late after you've taken it in. So just to remember that, but that might save you a lot of work further in the process. I'm under pressure, so I'm going to fly on. Case study, Al Sham's fruit packing, reduced number of complaints by 75%, enabled enforcement of first in, first out, and most importantly, got a payback. So they return on investment break even after 2 years. Okay, that's how quick they actually made remade the cost of their investment. Campino milk producers, I know they're quite a large company, but again, you're looking at a huge saving of over 276,000 per year. Okay, that might not seem relevant to a small to medium enterprise. In some cases, the saving in an SME can be a greater proportion of your turnover. The savings can be greater. Also for growers at Express, and it's not always about a monetary value. They've improved their reputation. They've improved their ability to trade with certain customers. And finally, I had to put in an Irish one. So we've Riverview Eggs, and you might recognize that man in the middle. And I have a video just to show you about a traceability system in a very small to medium enterprise in Cork in Ireland, which I think, or I hope, you'll find interesting. And then we're just about done.
Story of Review Eggs and my father. They started in 1966 in the 70s in a converted farm. Over the years, this business has been developed by both my mother and myself to where we're now the leading egg packers in the Republic of Ireland. We supply from stores, Tesco's, Supply Centra, along with the food services sector, and we're very proud of the family business that was started in 66. Where now we're selling from over 300,000 eggs. What makes us unique is that not only do we pack and distribute the eggs, but we've kept the tradition which my mother started in actually producing our own eggs. That tradition is carried on by my brothers Richard and Morgan, along with 10 other producers who produce far Review specifically. The journey of the egg begins at the farm. When it arrives at Review, the egg is scanned into the GS1 stock control system. This then stores that information up to the point of the egg being. That barcode follows those eggs right through. They pass through the system called handling, where we're able to see through the egg to see if there's any faults, any cracks, any soil egg. After handling is the encoding of its traceability information. On the egg, we print the best before date, and the farmer's identity number, and the production method, which is very important. The eggs are packed into the customer-specific packaging. Then the eggs put into another casing, where they travel on to a shrink wrap, and at this point, the final dispatch label for GS1 is applied to the outer case. When that box of eggs is scanned out of the premises, we're then able to see where this actual outer case ends up, and in turn, where that actual egg ends up. The implementation of the GS1 system was actually quite easy. The staff bought into it very, very readily because it was all done at the press of the public.
I started here in this company before GS1 came in here. So there was a lot of paperwork usage and everything. Then when the GS1 came in, there was no paperwork at all. So all traceability and everything would be able to trace through the computers on the system, so you would never lose the data that was inside.
We looked at other systems. That just didn't come up to mind. GS1 simplified the entire thing. They listened to us. They enabled us to put a system in place that our staff could understand. When a producer sends the eggs in here, we're able to demonstrate with great ease where all of those eggs ended up. And this is where quality control and GS1 marry up extremely well. Our customers are becoming more demanding in their requirements for traceability. We are satisfying this through GS1. I would absolutely recommend GS1 to any producer. They would work with you to develop a system of traceability that will work for both your customers and your staff and your auditors. At the end of the day, you have to sell a product and be able to stand over. And GS1 allows us to do that in a very simplified and user-friendly way.
So last slide, you'll be glad to hear. So I just want to make you think about the global traceability standard. If you're considering traceability, look at the GTS, the Global Traceability Standard, and see where yours fits. As I say, if you look at one up, one down, you have to consider moving away from it. It will not suffice into the future, and if you're forced to change in 2 or 3 years' time, it'll cost you a lot more. You're going to have to move to a decentralized system where you're sharing data with other stakeholders in the supply chain. You want to now look at traceable entities, not just products. You also want to look at your critical tracking events. Everything is moving towards event-based traceability. And this also folds into Internet of Things. It is conceivable in the very near future, in the next couple of years, we'll have pallets telling us where they are, what temperature they're in, and how long they've been there for. Now that's real, that's happening now, so it is going to come. So just to keep that in mind, you have to manage those events, traceability events. I won't go through every item on it, but it is something you need to consider. So do have a look at the standards around traceability. Okay, thanks very much.